If silence could speak. In this coastal forest in Washington state, there is a story to tell. And this place has a name, the Ghost Forest.
Guys, something's happening in Oregon or close to Oregon, but this could be an indication that something could happen not only to Oregon, but to the whole west coast of basically southern Canada, the western area of southern Canada, and along Washington and Oregon, even to the northern California areas in the west, so the west coast. And why am I saying this? Because there was a large earthquake off the coast of Oregon that just happened. So on October 30th, we have seen a magnitude 6.0, guys, 6.0. That is large. And it occurred approximately 180 miles, that's 290 kilometers, off the coast of Oregon. And you might say, well, that's so far. Well, you need to know what's there. Ever heard of the Cascadia subduction zone, or the big one, or the earthquake that will destroy the Pacific Northwest? Well, if you have, or if you don't have, you should watch this video. The US Geological Survey has reported that the quake happened around 1:15 p.m. local time, and it was very, very strong. And the distance from the coast, of course, has eased that off, but we have still seen minimal onshore shaking, with over 75 individuals reporting that they felt it, that they felt light tremors. Thankfully, there was no tsunami generated and no damage was reported this time. But is this an indication that we will see more of this coming? Guys, grab a coffee. Let's look into this. And by the way, thank you for supporting my channel or me with the coffees. Thanks so much. The link is here if you want to do that. It's greatly appreciated. So the recent 6.0 earthquake, very, very recent, off the coast of Oregon has raised some serious questions. Could this be a signal that something bigger is lurking beneath the Pacific Northwest? Could it be a warning that the long-feared Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, the big one, is imminent? So we know that Oregon's coastline, along with Washington to the north and Northern California to the south, and the southern part of Canada, they sit right on the edge of one of North America's most dangerous seismic hazards. And it's so dangerous because this area is so densely populated with cities like where I am, Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, and stuff like this. So the Cascadia subduction zone is something that we really need to worry about, especially since scientists are saying it's already overdue. And it's a very, very unique fault line. So most other subduction zones around the world are basically constantly rattling with small earthquakes. But the Cascadia subduction zone is eerily quiet, which leads to the fact that many people are not even fully aware of it, or they think, But you know, sometimes the most quiet things are the most dangerous things. And in this case, it's precisely the quietness that makes the Cascadia subduction zone so dangerous and deadly. It has the potential to produce some of the largest earthquakes on Earth. We're talking about magnitude 9 or even a magnitude 10 earthquake. So to understand why, let's dig into what makes the Cascadia subduction zone different from the other subduction zones. So let's have a look at the map. Where is the Cascadia subduction zone? So the zone stretches about 1,000 kilometers along the coasts of British Columbia, Canada, Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. And we have the Juan de Fuca plate. And this plate is slowly being forced beneath the North American plate. That's why it's called subduction. So they're not grinding alongside each other like the San Andreas Fault, or tearing away from each other like in Iceland or my recent video in Ethiopia. Nope, they're going underneath each other. And that's not good. The fault's potential for a major quake has been known for decades, but we're getting more and more information and new scientific results that make this thing even more scary or more dangerous. When the scientists discovered details and evidence that there was a massive quake that was occurring along the Pacific Northwest in the year 1700, that's when they started to understand the power that a Cascadia Fault earthquake would really have or unleash on us. So they can date that back to January 26th in the year 1700, that the Cascadia Fault zone ruptured and was creating a massive, massive earthquake. And this earthquake was like anything that we have experienced in today's world. It was likely reaching magnitudes between 8.7 and 9.2. And the coastal land there has dropped as much as several meters, has killed coastal forests, it has flooded low-lying areas, and then shortly after, probably 8 to 15 minutes later, a massive tsunami was generated that was racing across the Pacific and then eventually crashing into Japan, but also to the coast. A massive tsunami was created, and that's why you see along the coast here, Washington, Oregon, Vancouver Island, you see these signs, tsunami evacuation route. What they're saying is, if we see the big one, you have 8 to 15 minutes to search higher ground, very much higher ground, because that tsunami could be up to 100 feet, 30 meters, or even higher. So, and in the year 1700, it did create a tsunami, and that tsunami was also going over the Pacific and probably crashed into Japan. And it was hitting Japan without a warning. They didn't know, they didn't feel the earthquake. We all remember what happened in 2004. The tsunami in Indonesia caught everyone by surprise. So the records that are found in Japan, they describe this tsunami as an orphan tsunami because they didn't know where it was coming from. Basically, all of a sudden, they saw a destructive wave with no precursor earthquake. So they were like, whoa, where's this coming from? But how can we be sure that this was caused by the Cascadia subduction zone? You know, we don't have any written records in North America about this, but Mother Earth holds the clues, and you can find them along the coastline. Scientists have found these so-called ghost forests of dead trees, and they were able to find out why the trees are dead. They could date that back. All those trees stopped growing after 1699. So why would they all of a sudden, all together, stop growing? What they see in this area, layers of sand inland that must have been carried by very, very powerful waves. And then they were deposited above the tidal flats. And also, when they dig into the soil, they have discovered that there were ground fissures filled with sand. So liquefaction had been taken place. The soil was behaving like liquid due to this intense shaking, swallowing up stuff. And we have oral reporting about this. Indigenous communities have passed down tales of massive waves, shaking, and devastation that align with the timing of the 1700 quake. So all of this evidence is really painting a very dangerous and haunting picture for today, because we know we're overdue.
Chopping away at a mud bank, Carrie Garrison Laney exposes the signatures from the past.
This is an event. This is an unusual event.
She's a geologist with Washington's Sea Grant, working with the University of Washington.
And there's another sand layer comparable in size to the one above it.
What is gray is what stands out.
Here there's definitely organic material, but there's also a lot of mud and silt.
Sand pushed in by large waves, covered up by more mud.
This one has a radiocarbon date of about 600 years old. And this one has a radiocarbon date that suggests it's from 1700.
This Cascadia Fault, and you know, I'm sitting in downtown Vancouver right now in a high-rise. So if that earthquake happens right now, it will greatly affect me. And just a few weeks ago, you might have seen my video. I've been sitting on that couch behind me where Rudi is right now. I don't know if you can see him. And I felt the couch is lifting up with me. It felt really weird. And it was only off the coast, I think it was a 3.7 magnitude earthquake. The Cascadia subduction zone can create an earthquake, or this fault line can go from silence to a deadly roar within milliseconds, without a warning. That's why this is so bad. We know that the history of the Cascadia Fault is filled with deadly earthquakes or massive earthquakes. Today, it's strikingly silent. So scientists have different opinions. If you look at other subduction zones, like those along the Pacific coast of South America, they produce frequent smaller earthquakes that could help release the pressure over time. But this is not the case for Cascadia. The quiet has basically puzzled the geologists and has raised concerns about what's brewing below the surface. And we do see some earthquakes in Oregon, in Washington, in Canada. And you know what scientists are saying? This is not a sign that pressure is released and that the danger is decreasing. Not at all. Some say it's the opposite. Let's talk about the difference of the Juan de Fuca plate itself compared to other subduction zones in the world. The Juan de Fuca plate is quite young. It's incredibly young. Most subduction oceanic plates, such, for example, the one that's sliding beneath South America, they're millions of years old, meaning they've cooled, they've thickened, and they're heavily fractured. But the Juan de Fuca plate, on the other hand, is less than 10 million years old, and it's still relatively hot and thin. And why is that? Because it formed recently at a mid-ocean ridge. This plate is not as fractured or brittle like the other ones in South America. So it doesn't generate small earthquakes as often as other plates. So the silence is deceiving. It's quietly locking, interlocking, getting stuck with the North American plate. And then the danger is pressure's building up. And then when the moment is reached that they unlock, it can jump up and then release this massive, massive big one, the big earthquake. So right now, by being locked, it's building up strain for the next massive quake. So what about that 6.0 earthquake off the Oregon coast? So this quake struck along the Blanco fracture zone. That's what this area is called. That's basically a transformed fault that runs parallel to the Cascadia subduction zone. The Blanco fracture zone is a little bit different. So it's not unlike the Cascadia, where one plate sinks underneath another one. The Blanco fracture zone is a strip-slip fault. So that means the Juan de Fuca and the Pacific plates grind past each other horizontally, like the San Andreas fault. And this is a very active transform boundary, and it's slipping around 2 centimeters per year. And it's regularly producing moderate earthquakes. So since the 1980s, there have been 10 magnitude 6 plus earthquakes along this fracture zone. So an average occurrence every 4.5 years. The largest that we have seen was a 6.5 in 1985. And I think we can say that this current quake that we've just seen fits right within this pattern. So maybe we shouldn't be too alarmed as of yet. But the question is, could this 6.0 rumbling, although it's a different fault line, but it's rumbling, could that unlock the Cascadia Fault? Could that be the cause that these two plates are unlocking? Could it trigger the big one? And I'm working on a very interesting video about the San Andreas Fault, because scientists have discovered something, that there are like branching faults going to the sides of the San Andreas Fault. And they always thought, yeah, if the San Andreas Fault ruptures, that's what's causing the big one. But it's the small, tiny friends that are going away from it. They could trigger the big one there as well. They could trigger the San Andreas Fault. So do we have something similar here? So these findings and studies are quite fairly new. So we don't know so much about that yet, right? So scientists right now, they're saying the short answer is no. They don't think that the 6.0 could trigger the Cascadia Fault. They say it's not likely. But you know how it is with science. They don't know that much about it yet. That opinion can change in a heartbeat. So we know also for the Cascadia Fault that earthquakes sometimes, they act as foreshocks, but they are rare. And they typically occur along the same fault line or in close proximity to a potential main shock. So this recent quake was nearly 200 kilometers away from the Cascadia subduction zone. And scientists think that it is unlikely that it would cause significant stress changes to the locked Cascadia subduction zone, so that it could have any impact on that locked zone. The USGS is saying their forecast, their aftershock forecast, indicates right now that we could see minor aftershocks for a while with this Blanco fracture zone, but they say there's only a 3% chance that another earthquake above magnitude 5 or higher could happen there over the next year. So if they're correct, that would be good. We could all take a breather. But let's not forget, and this is what's so scary, the big one is inevitable. With 100%, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. Studies indicate that this subduction zone has produced massive earthquakes every few hundred years. I mean, they're still debating the exact interval. It's basically every 300 to 450 years. Some research suggests recurrence interval of 300 years, others say 500 years or even more. I'm hoping for the 500 years or even more scenario. Why is there so much difference between the projections? There's a lot of variability across the fault. Remember, it's 1,000 kilometers long, and there's different probabilities. We don't have to see the whole fault line rupture at once. It could rupture only in Canada, or only in Northern California, Southern Oregon, or in the middle. Of course, they could also trigger everything. But they have found out that some segments of the Cascadia Fault might rupture more often than others. And it seems what they recently published, and that's not good, is where I am right now, that seems to be the area that has the largest probability of rupturing next, so to speak. I've just released a video about what's going to happen to Vancouver Island, the capital of British Columbia, Victoria. And it's quite shocking, I have to say, how unprepared they still are. I'm putting this video in the end screen. It's something that's really, really interesting, guys, for you to watch. Not only if you're Canadian, also if you're American, because something like that could be transformed to cities like Seattle, especially Portland, that has so many old brick buildings. And when you drive over some of the bridges in Portland, it's scary. It's scary. If you want to go from Portland to the Troutdale area and these high bridges that look old, I don't think they will hold if there's an earthquake. I hope I'm wrong. The problem is, despite these scientific estimates of how many 100 years, one thing is certain: these earthquakes have been irregular. Some have occurred just decades apart, and then others have been separated by centuries. And the problem is that this unpredictability definitely adds to the element of suspense, because we have to make this clear in our heads. The Cascadia subduction zone could rupture in our lifetime, but it could also wait for a few more centuries. But if it ruptures, it's going to be the biggest disaster North America has ever seen. Ever. That's why, given the history of the Cascadia Fault and the potential, it is so important that people that live here are preparing for the big one, and that residents along the coast know how to react. There's reports with headlines like the earthquake that will destroy the Pacific Northwest, that will rip open the Pacific Northwest. And they're saying everything west of I-5 will be doomed. I-5 is the major highway that goes from California up to Canada. The impacts of a magnitude 9 earthquake or even a higher one would be absolutely catastrophic. Like the powerful shaking that will probably last for a few minutes, the ground subsidence, but before it subsides, it's lifting up because it's going underneath, right? Landslides, and then that massive tsunami that will reach the coastline, could reach the coastal towns within minutes. That's why in these areas, residents that live there, they're encouraged to secure heavy furniture, secure it on the ground, secure their foundations on the ground. But as I said, if you watch my Victoria video, how unprepared. People need to know their evacuation grounds, especially in coastal areas. How do you reach higher ground? Scientists are saying if you're on the coast, on the beach, and you feel the shaking, after the shaking, you run. You do not turn around. You do not help anybody else. You do not have time. It sounds cruel. You run. They're encouraging residents to have emergency kits stocked with essentials like water, food, medical supplies. Basically, you should have a bug-out bag with you at all times, in your car with you. Medical supplies that you critically need. There are earthquake drills happening for schools and communities across the Pacific Northwest. They call this like a shakeout, big shakeout scenario, like earthquake drills. They're trying to prepare for a scenario that they hope never comes, but scientists are very sure that it will come. It will eventually come. So let's close this off by saying the recent earthquake off the Oregon coast, the 6.0, has raised concerns, but scientists believe that it was a routine event along the Blanco fracture zone, unrelated to the Cascadia subduction zone. So this earthquake, it's unlikely to trigger any activity within the Cascadia Fault. And if it produces aftershocks, if it will, they are expected to be minor. But, and that's what we take from this, the Cascadia Fault, although being quiet, there is no reason to be complacent. The big one is coming, the next big one is coming, and when it does, it will be an event that will be remembered for generations. Sounds like doomsday scenario, but it is. It really is. Because right now the ground may seem still, but beneath the Pacific Northwest, there's a powerful force building up. And the only thing that we can do is be as ready as possible. And we have a long way to go along the Pacific Northwest. And let's hope that we have as much time as possible to prepare, because we're not ready yet at all, in my opinion. So guys, stay safe wherever you are. Check out my videos in the end screen. Something is rumbling again at the Fentale volcano in Ethiopia, and that's especially scary because it's not densely monitored and people feel in limbo. Many people don't know what to do. Some viewers that live there have reached out and told me the government doesn't seem to care, and it still seems there's no international help from scientists, experienced volcanologists and seismologists that could help monitor the area and give them some warning. So check out this video with the latest updates. There's thousands and thousands of people that would be affected in this area. And we're waiting for the next eruption in Iceland. So if you're interested in that, become a subscriber, check out my channel. And if you like, become a member of my channel. We're quite a unique group of people that are interested in these natural disasters and threats that we're all facing wherever we live, right? Join the channel for more behind the scenes videos about me, about Rudy, about what I'm doing when I'm not doing a video like this. I would love to see you there. And the links, everything you need is in the description of this video, or just simply click the join button that's also underneath this video, and I see you there. Thanks guys, hope to see you soon. Bye bye.